We very much want to thank the Frank Institute, the Foundational Questions Institute, the University of Chicago Philosophy Department, the Munich Center for Mathematical Philosophy, University of Chicago at University of California at Irvine's Department of Logic and was it Logic and Scientific Philosophy? I can never remember. Logic and Philosophy of Science. LPS. Whatever. You guys know what I'm talking about.
And the Fishbone Center.
Thank you. And also University of Bristol, and for generous financial and organizational support. And finally, I personally want to thank my co-organizers, Tom Pashby, Jim Weatherall, and Kareem Devil. We've all done, this is a very large, complex conference, and it's taken a lot of work, and these guys have been absolute champs. So you should go up and thank them all personally. If the conference works, you should go up and thank them all personally. If it doesn't, then I guess go up and come up and castigate us all. I will say I think the conference owes a special debt to Kareem, because the idea for this conference, the genesis of this conference was in a Stubel in Munich, where Kareem and I, after over many beers,
I think it's the Brewers of Munich.
We were discussing the many merits of Yes But. And we were bemoaning the fact that more people hadn't read it and hadn't digested it, and it wasn't more popular and well known, and hadn't been more as influential as we thought it should. And so we said, let's have a conference on it. And then it was remarkable how much the conference, from that start, grew. Originally we planned to have a one-day conference with just a few people talking about Yes But. And so many of y'all wanted to come and speak about Howard's work and the influence it's had on y'all and the community at large, that we ended up turning into a 2-day conference, and then a 3-day conference, and then a really full 3-day conference. So we really owe a debt of gratitude to y'all as well for, I think, what's going to be a really great time. I'll now talk about, I guess, Howard and his work in the conference in a little more personal detail. We're all here because we have been influenced by, inspired by, perhaps even to some degree shaped by Howard's work, and if we have been supernally fortunate by personal intercourse with Howard himself. I will not attempt in this introduction to praise his work, to laud his career with any semblance of objective evaluation. I think that would be impudent, actually. It'd be like kind of like saying, the Republic, it's not so bad. So, to try to describe the salutary influence of his thought and work on philosophy is beyond the scope of my allotted few more minutes here. And I'm hoping that scope and that influence will in fact be much better illustrated by the conference itself over the next few days than anything that I could say here in a few minutes. So I'll begin. Well, I've already begun a while ago. I'll continue with a brief summary of Howard's career. In 1958, Howard received his PhD in philosophy here at the University of Chicago under the supervision of Rudolf Carnap, and he wrote a dissertation entitled An Examination of Some Aspects of Natural Science, in which I think was already present his distinctive approach to problems and the foundations of contemporary science, an approach shaped by a sensitive and deep study of the history of these problems, structured by an intimate knowledge of the technical and formal material of science itself, and informed by a deeply humanistic spirit that refused to exclude the wider sphere of all intellectual pursuit, not just those narrowly and traditionally associated with the scientific and the philosophical, the traditionally scientific and philosophical. And he used these as what he saw as all of this as appropriate material to aid in the understanding and address of these foundational problems. I'll remark, so it came out in the so-called Steinfest that happened 17 years earlier, before, that David organized, that Carnap's letter of recommendation for Howard, the original recommendation for Howard, came to light. And I can't resist telling you all what one thing that Carnap said in this letter, which I think is illustrative of what Howard must have been like as a student. Carnap stated that of all his students, he considered Howard to be his true successor. And I can't imagine at all that was in any way hyperbole. Come on, Carnap is not the hyperbolic kind of guy. Right? So Howard then held academic positions at Case Western Reserve University and in Columbia, where in fact he'd received his BA as a young man, before returning to Chicago to spend the majority and remainder of his professional career. His first major publication, which in fact this conference, by very happy fortuitous happenstance, marked the 50th anniversary of, Newtonian Spacetime. I think it's no exaggeration to say that that paper inaugurated the modern study of the foundations of physics in its methodology, its close attention to formal and mathematical and real physical detail, and how they all emerge in a proper study of the foundations. And thereafter, Stein's work, I think, continued among a small group of cognoscenti to set the standard in the philosophical community and beyond for the study of theories of space-time structure, Newtonian and relativistic, the conceptual structure of quantum mechanics, the methodology of science in general, the character of scientific knowledge, and certainly, as we all know, the history of physics. That's all I'm going to say on that. If you're interested in more detail about his career and the highlights of his career and his work, it's not too hard to find out. I just actually recommend you go read all of his papers, and you will be a truly, truly educated and much enlightened human being if you do that and think about it. They're hard, they're complex, and they're deep, and they're dense, but they repay very careful, close study. Because I myself have in fact been supernally fortunate, as some of you know, Howard was the co-supervisor of my PhD committee along with David. Although, oddly enough, neither one of them actually was the chair of my committee when I defended. That was actually Bill Wimsatt. It's a funny story. Ask me about it sometime later. I, as well as my thought and work, have been deeply shaped by my relationship and interaction with Howard. And so I'm going to spend the remainder of my time, the last few minutes, trying to describe Howard himself as I know him and see him, without any pretense of objectivity at all. Just to try and give you a sense of the person that I so deeply respect and admire. I mean, we are most of us in this room, I think, maybe all of us, but at least most of us, philosophers by profession and by temperament and predilection. And I think most of us would most of the time feel no oddity in referring to ourselves as philosophers, meaning just really that we are academics whose discipline is philosophy, is called philosophy. Every once in a while, though, I actually do feel a little odd describing myself as a philosopher, and that's because there's another sense of the term, a deeper Platonic sense, a human who's a lover of wisdom for its own intrinsic beauty, and for the fruitfulness of conception it can lead one to. And inextricably connected with that, in the Platonic sense, it's a person whose spirit or soul is in the healthiest state possible for a human, manifesting the ancient Greek ideal of dike, which is of which justice is a very anodyne translation. And the soul is in this healthiest possible state because of that love of wisdom and the structuring of one's life to respect and nurture it manifests itself and is manifested in the harmonious equilibrium of the self and the spirit. And I've met only 4 people in my life who truly, I think, instantiate that deep Platonic ideal of philosopher. And of those 4, Howard, I think, is the wisest and the deepest. As a teacher and mentor, Howard was supererogatory in every way. The care and attention with which he read my work, the depth and thoroughness of his commentary, and uniformly penetrating criticism go far beyond anything else of its type I've ever seen. It was often harsh, true, in its direct and unflinching disassembly, examination, and evaluation of all my poor and messy jumble of attempted argument and abortive ideas. In fact, it was often brutal, to the point of shocking some of my fellow grad students. I actually used to go around when I would give Howard a sample of my work, and I would get it back with just the margins and the top and bottom and side margins and back just completely gray with his comments, and they were extraordinary. But he could be really harsh and brutal. I'll go around and show them because I found them so fascinating and amazing. Some of my fellow grad students, I once had one of them tell me that it constituted graduate student abuse and that I should report him to the disciplinary. But they didn't understand. My fellow grad students didn't understand. The harshness demonstrated really only the most benevolent concern, actually, expressed, in fact, with magnanimous generosity and depth and thoroughness. For Howard, lack of clarity and expression, imprecision in thought, sloppiness of conceit, these are moral failings. And Howard would do anything, I think, to save another person from the cognitive inferno that such moral degeneracy would inevitably lead one to, including the use of a little or even quite a lot harshness. For what's a little harshness that may shed light on the path to intellectual virtue, compared to a meretricious gentleness that tempts one only to the slothful fires of intellectual perdition. Many is the time I was in his office, in fact, and felt like Milton's Satan. Abashed, the devil stood and felt how awful goodness is. The difference is, I hope, that my feeling of awe at Howard's goodness kept me from the coldness of the deepest circles of philosophical perdition. If I have anything of intellectual conscience and the capacity for clarity of thought, precision of expression, and cleanliness of conceit, it is largely due to Howard's tireless training and guidance. As a teacher, he was remarkable as well. His seminars were infamous. They were scheduled for 2.5 hours. As I think my introductory remarks were. Oh no, actually, I'm doing really well. Actually, his seminars were scheduled for 2.5 hours. They were infamous for running minimum 4, often 6 hours, usually without a break. They were just so fucking. I'm sorry. They were so incredibly wonderful that you didn't want to get up in the middle and go to the bathroom because you didn't want to miss, 3 minutes of it. So it took, real hardy constitution to sit through them. Also, they were just incredibly exhausting as well because, again, just like his papers, they were so rich and dense, required so much concentration to follow. And that they were every one was a work of art. He once apologized to us because, and I'm gonna quote verbatim, I remember this very clearly. He said, I must apologize. I'm having difficulty speaking in complete paragraphs today. He said that without the slightest trace of irony or joke or anything. He was totally serious because he did in fact usually speak in complete paragraphs, just seamlessly, just a mellifluous flow, a mellifluous stream of beautifully structured thought. He actually had the most remarkable capacity too. He went off on a lot of tangents, like I tend to do. Unlike myself, though, Howard would often open windows, open tangents that would go like 10, 12 deep, nested. And he had the most remarkable capacity to then go back and close each one in reverse order. Come back to where he started from and continue on. So I actually took or sat in on every seminar Howard gave during my 6 years in Chicago. He never once gave me an A. I never got an A from that guy. I got an A minus. I actually think I got an A minus in every single class. And I know for a fact he gave A's to other students. So I like to think that he simply held me to a higher standard. But probably not true. He probably just thought it wasn't good enough.
That's a good grade for him.
Hey, I was thrilled to get it. Are you kidding me? Actually, when I first, one of the reasons I did that I sat in on every conference and seminar that he held, was because actually when I first within my first month at Chicago, one of the very first meetings I had with David, who was my other, the co-supervisor of my committee, David, again, with complete seriousness, and I thought he was joking at first, but I realized that David would never joke about something like this. He told me that whenever I went to speak with Howard in his office and had a conversation with him, I should make sure to record it, to write it down, what we talked about, because it was important. And it was. I make Howard sound very serious and sober, and even grave and stern, and well, he is, in part. But, if you don't know Howard's sly, puckish side, the subtle joy that shines out in the playful way he can approach problems, then you really don't know Howard. I think it just comes out every once in a while in his papers. The irrepressible wordplay, that erudite, but actually hilarious, literary and artistic references that are always on point. I mean, he's actually a master of physical comedy that is typified by his Chaplin impression. Actually, I'm just kidding about that. That's just a fantasy I have. I would love it. Because I actually bet he could do it, but sadly I've never seen it. I mean, I really think he could pull it off. I'd pay good money to see it. But actually, if you want to see how his playfulness displayed to best effect, I very strongly recommend that you read his unpublished manuscript, How Does Physics Bear Upon Metaphysics, and Why Did Plato Hold That Philosophy Cannot Be Written Down? And attend in particular to the interwoven themes of intellectual work as play and as art, which are themselves spun out in very subtly playful ways. And you'll be glad you did it. It's one of the greatest papers I've ever read in my life. And that includes my entire study of the history of all the greats in philosophy. I'll conclude by saying it's good to have heroes, I think. It is very useful in intellectual work and in life to have heroes. And I'm sure by now it's as clear can be that Howard is my hero. And I mean, it's good to have heroes, but I think it's actually better to overcome them if one can. As Nietzsche said, a student repays his teacher very poorly by never disproving him. And I've been struggling for the past 20 years to prove Howard wrong on something. And I have failed. Outside of some technical work in physics, my career in the philosophy of science has, I think, to a very large degree, it's turned out to consist of what I hope to be emendations, slight deepenings, or maybe, and extensions of a lot of Howard's thoughts and ideas. And what I hope is a useful and fruitful way, and in a way that I hope that he would approve of. And I've been very proud to be able to do that. Although I did once correct his grammar, and that was one of the finest days of my life. So, thank you. And